My name is Tohov, and welcome to my very first video series I have decided to record for YouTube. I currently use a virtual tabletop application called Fantasy Grounds to host a weekly 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons campaign for players who live in the US, UK, and Canada. I currently do not record these sessions, but I may look at doing so in the future depending on how comfortable I get with this whole process. The purpose of this series is to help players who I DM get used to the new interface, and to help new players who may be joining my game learn the interface, as well as potentially showcase some of the changes that have happened between the Classic and Unity versions of Fantasy Grounds, and I'll get into a bit more detail about what's going on there in a bit. Additionally, players who simply want to learn how to use Fantasy Grounds, and to a small extent some new DMs, can use this series, as I do intend to keep as much of the discussion as generic as possible so that it will apply to anyone. So what is Fantasy Grounds? Fantasy Grounds is a highly functional virtual tabletop application released by a company called Smiteworks and is used to host different types of role-playing games. A few examples would be 5th edition, Dungeons & Dragons, Savage Worlds, Pathfinder, Starfinder, and a number of other rule sets. There are several standard reference document rules, or SRDs as they're known, that are included with the software and provide basic functionality for games like 2nd through to 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons, Pathfinder, Numenera, and several others. However, to fully make use of Fantasy Grounds, there's a large selection of DLCs that can be purchased from Steam, Smiteworks' own Fantasy Grounds store, or additional RPG-related markets. Third-party markets can also provide extensions and modules a DM can use to further add enhancements, everything from themes all the way through to full campaigns. Not everything is limited to a purchase-only model, though. Some extensions and modules are also freely available directly from the Fantasy Grounds forums, as well as some maps and rule sets depending on what you're looking for. As a player, you would not really need to purchase any of the DLC packages, though having a local copy of the player's handbook or maybe some class-specific DLC packages can be helpful. However, when you as a player connect to a DM server, nearly all of the modules the DM has available will become available to you as a player, provided they have chosen to share that given module. Some items, such as tokens, which we will leave to cover later, do not necessarily get shared across to the player, but that is more of the exception rather than the rule. There are 5 different licenses someone can purchase, be they a player or a DM. The first will cost a player nothing, as it is a demo release, and it's highly useful for testing out Fantasy Grounds with some basic SRD rule sets and a sample campaign. But it can also connect to a DM's campaign if the DM has purchased the ultimate license or subscription. This means a player can give Fantasy Grounds a full run-through within a real campaign setting to help determine if they like the software enough to purchase it. However, it is possible for players to perpetually use the demo version at the time of this recording, as long as they don't mind only connecting to DM's campaigns running the Ultimate Editions or the Ultimate Subscriptions of Fantasy Grounds. I also believe a demo user can host or play in a campaign that has one other player either using the demo or standard license or subscription, but I've never tried that when I first gave Fantasy Grounds a test run, so I'm not really 100% certain in that particular case. I do see reference to this possibility on the Fantasy Grounds comparison chart that you see on the main Fantasy Grounds website. So it may be possible to test a campaign that way, but if you're really curious on whether that's the case or not, I highly recommend you contact the Fantasy Grounds support team. The next option is the standard license or subscription, and as a player you can connect to a DM's campaign who has purchased either the standard or ultimate licenses or subscriptions. However, as a DM, only others with a standard or ultimate license can really connect to you outside of that one demo user that might be there, but I'm not certain if that affects the ability for you to connect other standard or other ultimate users to the game. This does not really limit the player base, but it can be problematic if you're looking to get a new player involved with generally minimal cost to them up front. The next tier of license is the ultimate license or subscription, and as a player you can connect to any DM's campaign running with the standard or ultimate editions. As a DM, however, anyone using the demo, standard, or ultimate licenses or subscriptions will be able to connect to your campaign. This provides a good option to introduce new players to different tabletop options with no cost to them up front, and allows those players who might be able to not necessarily afford the software to enjoy the games as well. This does have the downside of putting the brunt of the cost on the DM initially, but it quickly pays for itself over time, as the campaigns can typically take a year to many years to complete, depending on how often the campaign is run. Both the standard and ultimate licenses, not their subscriptions, discussed so far, are perpetual, and they do not expire. This makes them perfect for one-time purchases for the entire time that you use the application, While this requires a larger upfront cost, that can quickly balance itself over time. In the case of a AAA game, for example, you might pay $80 or more upfront, but only spend 40 hours or so in the game, assuming no DLC is released for it. However, it is not uncommon to spend hundreds of hours playing Fantasy Grounds, depending on the number of campaigns you play in, or if you're the DM, how many campaigns you run at the same time. This provides a much larger bang for your buck, and as a player, there is no limit to the number of campaigns you can connect to, outside of the limits already discussed so far. DMs can sometimes spend much more time in Fantasy Grounds than a normal player. This is primarily due to the advanced reading, preparation, and other tasks that a DM might want to complete before running a particular game, and this really reduces the overall costs when weighed against time. When it comes to the two subscriptions, they provide equivalent functionality as their perpetual licenses, but are billed on a monthly basis. Unlike the perpetual licenses, however, if you choose to cancel your subscription, you will no longer receive updates to your local copy of Fantasy Grounds, nor will you be able to reinstall it if you happen to remove it for some reason or your system crashed and you were reinstalling it on a new system. Additionally, any payment you make towards a subscription does not accumulate towards the balance of a perpetual license, so it would not make sense for someone to use a subscription if they plan to run or play in campaigns quite frequently over a long period of time. Finally, you won't lose any of the content that you've created, and it will become available to you again when you decide to renew your subscription. This is perfect for anyone who has a limited amount of time to play or run a campaign, and allows you to simply pay for the time that you're using it. A good example would be a student who might not have time to play or run a campaign during their school year, but is freely available to do so over the summer break. The one thing I will note, though, is that it is not clear if you lose the ability to play in campaigns if your subscription has expired. This sounds more like it would affect a DM rather than a player, and at the same time, the FAQ makes reference to losing ultimate license functionality if your subscription has expired, but what does that actually mean if you're only running with a standard subscription? How will that affect you?